This doesn't replace everything else you normally do as a teacher. It is literally just another device you have in your classroom. So some days you use a piece of chalk, some days you don't. Some days you may use a textbook, other days you don't. Some days you use the iPad, other days you don't. In my school, I'm probably the most active teacher with this device. But it's not uncommon for me to tell my students, and guys, you know what? Let's put the iPads under the desk today, we're just going to use pen and paper. There's nothing wrong with going back to the way that you normally do things. The whole idea of the iPad, and what I'm hoping to kind of introduce you to, is this idea of just slightly stepping out of your comfort zone. If something like this makes you a little uncomfortable, no one's asking you to create some of the stuff I'm going to show you today. But think about how you can kind of take those baby steps. It all begins with the little steps. Most of what I'm going to show you today is stuff that, again, we've had an iPad program in my school for 5 years. This is, we're a little bit ahead. So think of this as not, well, I don't know how to do that, so I can't use this. It's more of, well, I'm going to learn so I can get to that point. It's a lot of, again, it's think of a learning curve. Don't panic if, well, I don't know how to do this, I don't know how to do that. Think about it in terms of baby steps. A little bit about myself. As I was an English language arts teacher at Rothman High School. We're in the 5th year of our one-to-one iPad program. Every student in our school is given an iPad in 9th grade. They keep that iPad until they graduate. Graduation, if they want to get their diploma, they have to give us the iPad back. That's how we make sure we get them back. So we're actually now at the point where we've been rolling that in 9th grade. Every single student and every single staff member in our school has one. Now we're actually working on a rollout in our elementary school. So I'm actually doing the professional development with our elementary school teachers. I'm also an Apple Distinguished Educator, which is a remarkable program to get involved with. In other workshops, I do workshops on Twitter, and the first question people ask me on Twitter is, well, how do I know who to follow on Twitter? Who do I know is good, who do I know is bad? I always tell people, if you can find someone who's an Apple Distinguished Educator and or a Google Certified Teacher, they've kind of been vetted by these two organizations that when it comes to technology in the classroom, they know what they're doing there. I'm not saying they're going to be right all the time, but it's kind of like they're not just someone online spouting out opinions. They're someone who actually has gone through this process and may have a good idea of what they're talking about. And I've also completed the Folger Teaching Shakespeare Institute, which these 3 programs are what has shaped me as a teacher. Because while the Folger Teaching Shakespeare Institute has nothing to do with the technology, it introduced me to the idea, those of you who are familiar with the Folger method of teaching Shakespeare, is the idea that kids learn Shakespeare when they perform Shakespeare, when they interact with his words. And when I first went through the Folger Teaching Shakespeare, I thought that was like a light bulb went off. And it's not just about Shakespeare, that's about all literature. And it's not just about literature, it's about anything they learn in school. Kids learn better when they interact, when they can, kind of create something. I always say that creation, when we look at Bloom's taxonomy, think back when we all learned about that the top of Bloom's taxonomy, the highest form of learning is creation, is synthesis. So, I can go and give my students tests and I can stay on that traditional route, or I can transform my classroom into an area of creation for my students. And the cool thing about the iPad is the tools in the Apple ecosystem allow my students really an infinite number of methods to show me that they get it, that they understand what we're doing in class, whether it's something we're reading, whether it's a concept in math, whether it's in their science classes. It doesn't matter that there's an infinite number of ways that this device can be used for our students to create something, and that's really what I focus on when it comes to technology in the classroom. I was talking a little earlier with some people about the idea of the Sammer scale. When we look at the way technology is used in the classroom, and I love the way that this one illustrates it, when we use technology in the classroom, are we simply substituting? Are we taking something instead of a handout? We're now going to take that handout, we'll scan it in as a PDF, and we'll email that to the kids, and they'll do the same handout on the iPad. You're really not transforming the classroom that much, but you are substituting what you used to do with technology. What if you could augment that? What if you could embed an audio file so that when you send that document to the student, instead of them reading the instructions, they hear an audio file of you giving them the instructions? Again, it's a cool use of technology, but you're still pretty much at the cup of coffee. But now maybe you're a latte. When you modify it, when you begin to kind of change the way that you teach that information, the way you assess your students on that information, now we're modifying. Now we've significantly redesigned the task. And that's, I love that it compares that to the caramel macchiato. And then finally, redefinition. That tech allows for creation of things that we couldn't even conceive before. That we'll have entirely new ways of assessing our students and teaching our students, and that's the R. None of these are bad. None of the, it's not bad to be at the S or the A level of the Sammer scale. This is great when you're starting out. This is exactly where you should start out. But your eventual goal is to get here. is to get to that idea where technology can transform your classroom. It can transform the way you teach. It can transform the way you assess your students. And it can transform the way your students express their understanding. So the cornerstone of my classroom is iMovie. I love this app. It's great, not just because it's from Apple, but no matter what app I have them created. I've always said, people ask me, what are the best, what do you look for when you buy an app for your school? And I'll tell you, the first thing I look for is any type of video or image app. Does it export to the camera roll on my iPad? Can I look at it on the camera roll? Because if the app can get it to the camera roll, then I can get it into iMovie. And once I can get it to iMovie, I can do great things with it. I can edit it, I can cut it, I can add music, I can add titles. And I'm going to show you some examples of the way that I use iMovie in my classroom. Think about filming video in your classroom. When I went to high school, if I wanted to create a video project in my high school, I had to get this big, giant, clunky video camera from the AV department. And once I did that, maybe we'd have the 2 VHS editing bays that we had to. Every one of our students is walking around with basically a film studio, a full film studio in their pocket, where they can film, edit, and then upload and share their work with the entire world. The device that they carry around with them. They literally have that ability. It used to take tens of thousands of dollars worth of equipment they carry around in their pocket. They can do more than that. So the first project I'm going to show you is a digital storytelling project that one of my students put together for A Midsummer Night's Dream using iMovie. All I have to do is analyze for this one, if you're familiar with the play, this is the final speech by Puck at the end of A Midsummer Night's Dream. And the student in this case he looked for meaning in every line. Is there a vocabulary word I didn't understand? Is there a tone or a context to the line? And then he looked for an image that went along with that. And he used iMovie to stitch all of that together with a voiceover and a soundtrack, and this was the final product.
And this week in idle theme, no more yielding but a dream.
So through the image selection, he's showing me he's wrestling with the
If you
vocabulary.
pardon, we will mend. And as I am an honest buck, if we have unearned luck, not to escape the serpent's tongue, we will make amends or love. Else the puck a liar call, so good night unto you all. Give me your hands if we be friends, a raven shall restore amends.
So through his image selection, he's showing me that he understands the vocabulary, that he understood through the music selection, he understands the tone. That's a student, had I given him an essay to write, analyze the final speech in Midsummer Night's Dream. He probably would have done it, but this was a much better way for this student to express his understanding of that final speech. And digital storytelling, while we use it in English, it can be used across the curriculum in other subject areas. I've seen teachers do similar projects with the Constitution, where they'll break down parts of the Constitution and find images that go along with the language to help students. Again, we're a visual, and our students are a visual generation. Sometimes they learn better with images than they do with written words. So we have to kind of think about ways to integrate those two things together. Another project I've been doing with my students lately, we call it the Yak Track. And this is a great, very simple project to do in iMovie. Have you ever had a DVD and you can listen to the director's commentary track or the actors on a DVD, you can kind of listen to that alternative audio track? Well, what I'll do is when we're reading a book, we'll watch the film version of the book. But the entire time my students are given clips where they have to draw comparisons between the film version and what we've read. And this is what one of the students came up with on Saturday, 451.
In this part of the movie, Montague is surprised when the firemen are pulling up in front of his own house. In the book, the scene takes place at night. I don't really like this change. I think Ray Bradbury wanted the firemen to surprise their victims and use the darkness to seem more threatening. In the book, Montague's wife's name is Mildred, and she just brushed past him as she leaves the house. Here in the film, the director has changed her name to Linda, and she gives Montague an excuse. I like the way Bradbury did it better. There is no excuse for Mildred's betrayal on Montague, so why offer one?
That student showed me a really deep analysis comparing the film to the book, but again, through this Yak Track. You're basically sitting there in iMovie, lowering the main audio track, and then just pressing record and recording her own audio track over it. At the very heart of that, though, before she recorded it, was the written component. It sounded like she was reading, because she was reading. We don't abandon, just because we have the technology, we have these creation projects, we don't abandon writing. Writing is still an important skill. So all of the creation that I'm showing you usually begins with some sort of a written project. Puppet Pals, for those of you working at the lower grade levels, I've used this a lot with the elementary schools that I'm working with. And basically, it's the first of some of the avatar programs I'm going to show you, where students can kind of use characters to represent themselves. The way that I use this with Shakespeare is, blocking, the idea of understanding where one character is standing in relation to another character and how they're interacting with each other. So again, it can be used across the subject area. I've seen people use this when discussing military battles. Again, positioning. Anytime you want to show students where things are in relation to other, or characters, or groups, this is a great app for it. This is the opening fight scene from Romeo and Juliet.
My naked weapon is out. Quarrel, I will back thee.
How? Turn thy back and run?
Fear me not.
No, Mary, I fear thee.
Let us take the law of our sides. Let them begin.
I will frown as I pass by, and let them take it as they list.
Nay, as they dare, I will bite my thumb at them, which is disgrace to them if they can.
Thanks for watching my video about the amazing element, neon.
So while that was made in Telegami, it was actually all kind of stitched together and put together in iMovie. And it's, again, some students, I worked in an alternative program a number of years ago, and one of the biggest problems we had in the alternative program was we had kids who were school phobic. And they were very quiet. And they were, the idea of asking a student like that to stand in front of a room and speak, some kids, that really gives them anxiety and fear. This is a way a kid can do a presentation and completely remove all of that anxiety and fear. Another great thing we've been doing with iMovie in an app called Green Screen by Doing. I'm lucky enough that the back wall of our cafeteria in Roslyn is painted this horribly ugly, garish green color, which is perfect for doing green screening. If you're not familiar with green screening, you have someone stand in front of a solid, usually green wall, and then you're able to remove, using this app called Green Screen by Doing, you can remove the green and replace it with a video or audio image. A video or picture image. So what I'll do again, because I do Romeo and Juliet a lot, is I'll give students scenes from Romeo and Juliet, and then they have to watch the scene while sitting in front of the green screen, comment on it. And then they create something like this where they act as film critics, where they compare the play to the movie.
The class learning decision was obviously a bizarre one, and probably came out sort of controversial, but I'm picturing pretty honestly. This is not the way Shakespeare intended. But I fully support it, because I think Shakespeare...
It's kind of like that Yak Track project, but where the students actually in the image, they kind of really enjoy creating this.
And I think he would have supported doing one that's different. Obviously having everyone in Hawaiian shirts and the Mock gang, just because he wants it to be applicable to all sorts of people. He wants the book to be. And I like the decision to keep the original dialogue and the core plot, as opposed to something like The Lion King, which is Hamlet, or 10 Things I Hate About You.
So my point is that you can kind of have them comment on any piece of video that you want to give them. So again, it could be something, a news clip where they comment over it. Any type of video. Again, the examples I'm showing you, yes, they're very English focused because they're coming out of my classroom. But I'm going to show you a few examples outside of the subject area. But think about how this could be applied to really any discipline. iFunface is a great new free app I've just started playing with this year. I love it. Have you ever seen like Jib Jab, those things where you can kind of take a picture and it makes the mouth kind of look all weird and fun? Basically, what I'll do is this is an example from when we were reading the Odyssey in my classroom. So students had to find a statue of somebody from the Odyssey and then bring that statue to life using iFunface. And what it really boils down to, it was a character analysis. They were really analyzing a character from the Odyssey. So here's a student that had to do Odysseus' son Telemachus.
Hi, I'm Telemachus. My father, Ulysses, has been gone for 10 years. And before Minerva told me otherwise, I thought my father was dead. Although I had given up, my mother, Penelope, had not, and had made the many suitors believe. Meanwhile, they destroyed our property and took our food. What Minerva told me was that my father was not in fact dead and trapped on an island. So I, Telemachus, plan to set off on a journey to search.
So my point behind that, if I had said to my students, look, I want you to sit down and give me a character analysis of Telemachus handed in by the end of the period, they'd do it. but they wouldn't be enthusiastic about it. There wouldn't be that level of engagement. When I show them something like that, so you're going to make something like this, but the first thing you have to do is write that character analysis. There's an enthusiasm, there's an engagement. They want to create. I'm telling you, you give your students these creative options to express understanding, they dive into it. They really do enjoy it. I use a lot of annotation apps. For me, in the English classroom, I use them for scripts and prompt books, but it can be really used to mark up any kind of document. Any document, anything where you want people to take notes on it. It's a great tool for it. And what I like about it as compared to paper, taking notes the traditional way, is the ability to share this. Students, when I have them do scripts, one student annotates on their iPad, and then they share the script with the groups. And in this case, we were making prompt books. We were looking at a scene from Romeo and Juliet and assigning physical activities or vocal inflection to every time a character speaks. And the fun part about that is they can then take this from their iPad and use the camera function to bring what we call from page to stage, to bring that prompt book to life.
Oh, speak again, bright angel, for art thou as glorious to the night, being o'er my head, as a winged messenger of the
So he's basically performing all of those little notes and stuff that he added into the script.
The mornings that fall on the gaze of him. When he starts the lazy pumping.
Another app I'd like to share with you, Show Me. This is a great, it seems like it's nothing more than your basic whiteboard app. But what I love about it is the ability to record in real time any lesson that you're doing on it. So this is, I'm going to show you an example from a math classroom. I was a horrible math student. I would understand it in class, but the minute I got home, it would all evaporate somehow. I was definitely more of a humanities student as a kid. Something like this would have saved me. If I could have gone home and watched the entire lesson over again, or sat maybe watched it with my dad, who could then help me with it, suddenly I would have understood some of these concepts. So this is a teacher who records his entire lesson
The perpendicular bisector,
in real time.
or the line of equidistance, is the line that goes through the midpoints.
So as he's saying actions, exactly what he was doing in class is repeated in the movie.
Perpendicular to the line joining.
It's similar, it depends on which video content, it's similar to that, yeah. But this basically, you can create your own version of those videos.
Gradient, which is going to.
Yeah, I'm not gonna, I don't understand any of this, so, maybe you said through it. But it's that idea that any lesson that you teach, if you kind of want to do an interactive whiteboard, you can then export it, and your students can have a copy of that they can watch anytime.
Okay, so the
For a snow day.
Well, that's actually, I was just talking with my superintendent about this the other day, that, we're going to get to a point where the snow day will become, I use iTunes U in my classroom, which is a presentation for another day, but it basically allows me to distribute any material I would distribute in class right to their iPads instantly. So snow days are really a thing of the past for me, that even when the kids are home, I can still get them work. They can still send in work, and they hate it. They absolutely hate it. Even when I'm absent, when I'm out at something, they know, like, I don't leave subplans anymore. I send the work directly to my students. And it doesn't sound like, wow, why is that such a big deal? Psychologically it is, because it's not the sub giving them work, it's me giving them work. They can't play the sub didn't tell us that, or we didn't know. It's their teacher telling them, you have to do this. The camera on the iPad is an incredible tool for expressing understanding. I had some ESL students a number of years ago that we were reading A Midsummer Night's Dream, and if I had asked them to, the whole idea of the Folger method, getting them to interact with the words, if I had asked these students to perform in front of the class, they would have been mortified, because they really were still learning English. So they used this app called Comic Life to create a graphic novel of the meeting scene between the mechanicals at the opening of Midsummer Night's Dream. And what I love about a project like this is these are kids who, had I given them an essay or asked them to do a performance, the language issue would have played a huge, huge role in it. Here, they're showing me their complete understanding of the play through their body language, through their facial expression. He knows, what is Pyramus, a lover or a tyrant? He's asking a question. He kills himself most gallant for love. Here, Peter Quint's flute, you must take Thisbe on. He knows, he's answering a question. It's through every one of their facial expressions, through their body language, they show me they understand what they're reading. Within Pages, which is a free app we all get on the iPad, now I think everything past an iPad 4, I think you get it free on, there's these great templates in Pages. But again, all I'm doing is taking the same assignment I used to give. Okay guys, we've just finished reading this chapter in the Epic of Gilgamesh. All right, tonight go home and write me a summary and hit these points. And they're going to do it, but they're not going to be enthusiastic about it. Say, guys, we're going to make a newspaper, and every day we're going to update the news in Urich. It's still really the same assignment, but I'm reframing it for them. I'm redesigning it for them that every day they're writing a newspaper, and every day they're updating the newspaper based on the events of what we've read about in the Epic of Gilgamesh. And then, we add the fun component. They can throw in help wanted ads in other news around Urich. This person included a weather report, which if you get this warm and then very warm, the idea that it's always hot in Urich. But again, it's that same idea of them just basically summarizing what they've read, but reframing it for them to build that engagement. Keynote is, if you ever use PowerPoint. PowerPoint is Microsoft's version of Keynote. Keynote is Apple's version of PowerPoint, which is a great presentation tool. It's what I'm using right now to show you this, but it's also a great tool for desktop design. And one of the things I've been doing a lot with my students lately are infographics, using Keynote to create infographics. So when we're reading the Epic of Gilgamesh, we look at the idea that, oh my God, well, Gilgamesh gets caught in this flood. One of the characters in Gilgamesh survives a flood after building a boat. That sounds like a story we've heard before. And it launches us into this research project about how different cultures all over the world have a flood myth, have a flood story. Yes?
How often do you give these creative assignments?
I would say every unit there's always one creative assessment and one essay written or test traditional assessment.
And what percentage of the creative piece is done in class versus at home?
It depends. Most of it's done at home. Most of the creative stuff is done at home because in my school they bring the iPads home with them, so they have the tools to kind of work on it at home. So the first time we do a project like this, we'll do it in school. For example, this one we did together. This was a collaborative research project that we did as a class in class one day, where we did a ton of research on flood stories from around the world, and we decided to present it in a visual format. Later on in the Epic of Gilgamesh, a snake steals this flower that Gilgamesh needs, and it's the snake that messes up all of his plans. So then we begin to look into the idea of how many cultures have stories about snakes, messing everything up for people. And it basically it's the same thing. This becomes a research paper. So while this is this cool, fun, creative project, all I'm having them do is gather information and gather sources for the fact that after this, we're going to turn all of that information into a research paper on snake stories throughout history. So it's, again, building that engagement. Here's the fun part, but we're learning while we're having fun. A few more apps that I just want to share with you that I love. GarageBand. I have students that, again, ask them to write an essay, they're going to bomb. Ask them to write a song or express themselves musically, they're going to do a wonderful job of it. This was after reading Beowulf. I'm just going to play it because I feel like it speaks for itself. Song from Frozen. And again, it's just allowing her to show me she understands what she's reading through a medium that she's comfortable with. ThingLink is a great app that hopefully this will work off of my remote here. I'm going to have to come up here to show you guys. But it basically allows you to annotate images. I think some of you may be familiar with this app. And you can link images to specific text, video, or web pages. And while it's an app for your iPad, what I really like about it is that it's really web-based. It's not platform specific. So you can use it on your iPad, you can use it from a computer, you can use it from a PC, a Chromebook, it doesn't matter. It's completely web-based. The app is good, but you don't need the app. And it can really be used across any subject area. So here's an example, hopefully I can get this to launch, I might have to come here, of how I know someone who's using ThingLink in the math classroom. This is, okay, I'm gonna come up there and launch this. This is a teacher from down in Austin, Texas, another Apple Distinguished Educator named Kathy Yenka. She goes by the name on Twitter, Mathy Kathy. But here she's done this whole idea of getting, again, I don't understand any of this, I'm not going to pretend to. But, okay. But all throughout this image that she's created, she's embedded this information. So she can give this to her students and it becomes this great guide on getting to know quadratic functions. And it's not just about inserting text, she can actually, I think at some point in here, she can even insert a video. So within this, the kids can then watch a video. I believe there's one on how a basketball and calculating parabolas. So within this one link that she can send, she can create this content for her students. Well, I'm sorry, not create this content, but compile content for her students. So all throughout this, there's questions that she's embedded in this image that it basically makes it interactive for the students. So it's not just, her handing them a bunch of notes or handing them a packet. It's like I said before, this visual format. Here's an example of someone using it in the science classroom. And I love this. They have basically taken parts of a cell. And all throughout this image of the cell, they've embedded this information. So here's a video on photosynthesis. Something about the Golgi apparatus. Again, I'm a humanities guy. I don't understand most of this. But I do understand that what they've done is they've taken this image of the cell and embedded lots of different content in there, from links, everything you ever wanted to know about cell membranes, to videos, to the cytoskeleton wrap. So think about anything you would ever give your students. I've seen, well, actually social studies teachers that will do this. I mentioned earlier something called westward expansion. I saw a social studies teacher that took a map of the United States and added in all of these points on the United States to teach our students about westward expansion. Here's an example of how I'm using it. I keep hitting that button. Okay, good. How I'm using it in the humanities classroom. I just finished reading Ovid with some of my students. And we were reading Apollo and Daphne. So then we looked at the famous Bernini statue. And my students had to find specific text in the story by Ovid that connected to images that were that were used for the statue. So every decision in here connects to a piece of text from Ovid's Metamorphosis, from the story of Apollo and Daphne. So again, it's the kids are interacting with the text. And I think the final example I'm going to show you is how I even know someone who's using it in phys ed. Whether they're using it in a phys ed classroom. This is a teacher who I know who, well, they're lucky enough to teach somewhere where their phys ed department has kayaking. And as part of the preparation before they do their kayaking stuff, the kids have to go through this thing link where it's a complete instruction on what they should be doing with every part of the kayak when they get into the water. Make sure you have your life jacket up. Yes, I would love to teach at a school where they have kayaking. That would be wonderful. And I think this is one of the last examples I'm going to show you is iBooks Author. I love iBooks Author because it can be used in a bunch of different ways. iBooks Author, it's an app for the MacBook, and I should probably retitle the slide Book Creator because there's an app that you can get for the iPad. But one of the biggest problems I faced as I was teaching my students more and more common core literature, when I teach the Odyssey, for example, why do my students actually have to read that? I mean, what's going to stop them from just going online and looking up a plot summary or a chapter summary on SparkNotes or Cliff Notes? So what we decided to do is we use iBooks Author kind of, rather than have my kids look up study guides, we use it to actually create a study guide. So what my students will do is they'll read the entire Odyssey in class, and I give them an electronic version of it. And as they're in class, they're using iBooks to annotate that. And they're taking notes, and the notes are in different colors. At the end of every class, they share those notes with me. So I can track their progress. I know who understands what they're reading and who doesn't understand what they're reading. And the culminating activity is I've broken them up into groups, assigned each group a different book in the Odyssey. They have to then create the study guide. So rather than rely on a study guide, my students are using their iPads and the Macs to kind of create a study guide. So they have to examine different themes. And again, they have to create content that goes into it. So they have to do videos, all created on the iPad. They character analysis. They examine literary elements. They are basically writing a version of SparkNotes or Cliff Notes, whatever you used when you were in school. And they're basically, rather than turning to that, they're creating their own. And the final project they do with them that I love with iBooks Author is my students, I'm very proud of them, we actually have work that's published on the iBook store. We actually, again, they will write their own original content, we'll put it into iBooks, and then using a program called iBooks Producer, I can actually put it up on the iBooks store for them. And they're really proud of the fact that they can write, again, these are some examples, they write short stories about characters from literature, but from the bad guy's point of view. Yes, somebody did Principal Vernon from The Breakfast Club. So please keep in touch with me. If you're doing anything really cool in your classroom, I'd love to hear about it. If you want to try something, have any questions, please feel free to email me. Also,